Hello, my fellow YouTubers. This is Roy back again. Let me go fetch some parts. I'll be right back. All right, let's get to it. So I'm gonna show you guys winding the wheel. Last night I finished this up and had it all connected. And little did I know that one of the wires was grounded out to the magnet. Must have been a bad section of copper. Even though I got the magnets, you can see here, there's duct tape that goes around. Somehow it grounded out, so if you were to have like the positive hooked up to the wire, and if you were to just take the negative and just touch, it would spark. So I said, well, I undid them all, and I'm starting them over from scratch. So this is the feed right here, and that's going to be a positive. So let's go ahead and take the positive and connect the 12-volt battery. That's what that is, 12-volt battery. Car battery. All right, so there's that. And I completed so far tying together 1, 2, I'm on this one. And these, you can see, I'm gonna go ahead and, this is where I stopped. Nope, that's not it. Yep, that is where I stopped. So that one's done as well. So this is where I stopped. And let's go ahead. We're gonna remember the jumper cable with the positive on this side. And here's a keeper bar. Let's see if it pulls a keeper bar from my hand. Oh yeah. So it sucked the keeper bar, and we are looking at, that's north, that's south, that's north. And we're gonna come over to this next section, and we're gonna make this, well, that's a north, and that's a south. And remember, these are magnets. So that's a south. So when we energize this, we want it to stay south. We don't want it to flip or nothing. So the way we do that is you wound, this one's wound the opposite direction of this. So this one is clockwise, and that's north, okay? And then this is south, and south is counterclockwise. Remember that in your head, guys. So the start of the south is down here, and what I'm gonna do is cut the little edge off. Remember how to undo these. All right, this is what you want to do. I'm going to connect these at the bottom. You can see over here, this is where the tied together. I did down bottom. Before I did them up top, I think they were touching this metal pole here. I couldn't find what it was, but damn if I'm going to do all that work and have to redo it. So here I am redoing it, but I'm going to redo it once. So we're going to tie the bottom together. So that means I'm going to go ahead and cut the length perfect that way, and the length perfect that way. And what I suggest is to get the coating off. I use my little Dremel and got a little file bit on there, grinder. I just grind off. Comes off very easy. Okay. Instead of sanding, forget about it. Who wants to sand? That's for beginners. And if you are beginning, Learn quick. Then I'm going to grab the end. And what I did last time is I put it all together, then I checked it. Bad mistake. A little too confident, a little too cocky, let's just say. Too confident and cocky. And look what it cost me. So this time I'm doing every one at a time and I'm checking. So this right here, we know this is South Pole, and we're connecting this end of this one to the start of this one. And just by winding it the opposite way, it is something I always wanted to talk to people about. And I'm running live right now, nobody's even on. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about it, because the people who are gonna catch this video down the road are going to be the first to see it versus the live people. Oh, I got somebody on there. So somebody live is gonna hear it. So the interesting thing about connecting, well, first of all, these are magnets, okay? These magnets came off the Model T Ford back in 1914, 1908, 1912, in that area there. Ford produced and made these magnets. And the gentleman who was responsible for these magnets, his name is Ed Spiderhuff. He was an engineer for Ford. These are regular magnets, okay? Good for back in the day, for 1910, 1912. But in today's standards, they don't hold a stick to anything. So I got these all charged up, and I got them charged pretty good, okay? But when you fire this up, they become gorilla strength. So we increase the strength of the magnets. And by keeping the magnetic pole the same coming out of the wire as the magnet end poles where they're dammed up in the end is very important, because we will be flopping the poles on this whole wheel assembly, and it will be switching its poles and recharging the magnets every time it goes back to its normalcy. Howdy, Energy Crafts, what's up, buddy? So we're winding up the wheel, telling everybody this is 16 gauge wire, sweet 16. It's pretty interesting. What I was getting ready to say is, you know, the start, I'm putting in 12 volt car battery from the start, okay? Now, in order to keep the magnets, whatever pole they are, the same pole when it's energized through the coil, is pretty interesting how it works, because the mind-blowing thing to me is the realization of there is an R standards on how we look at electricity, or magnets, should I say, is a positive and negative. But when you look at electricity in this wire, the electricity is pushing out these magnets to be north and south based on the direction it turns. So the interesting thing is, the whole time we're putting positive in from the very start on the first coil, and we're going through each segment of coils, and because we're winding this opposite way, that energy that was positive coming in turns into negative, turns into positive, turns into negative, turns into positive, by swapping the exact direction of that energy coming in. I find this to be fascinating, to where I could say right now that there is only one energy, and the results out of that one energy is this bipolarization, and it's done through a dielectric, so it's dipole. So what I'm getting at is, it's amazing that we're taking one energy, positive on this side, negative on this side, but we're allowing it to change its poles from every other direction, but the energy's running in. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way of looking at the energy. Say it's positive and negative is producing the effect of each coil because it's going through the opposite direction. So you got one energy coming in, obviously the other energies chasing the other. They're twirling by each other on each separate coil that's producing through the iron a separate pole. It's amazing. So let's go ahead and move on to the second coil, or this next section of coils. So we go with the start of this coil. We got that ready, and we're going to connect the bottom of this. This is the end of this coil. And let's go ahead and cut those. And we're going to grind off the insulation. So we'll go ahead and connect the ends of this coil to the start of this coil, and it's wound the opposite way as that coil. And we can talk about another part of the wheel that is connecting the two ends of, we're gonna have two wires, one on the start of the coil all the way around and the other end. And we're gonna talk about these two sections right now. And I have them separated so I could charge either ring with an opposite pole. And let me finish twisting this up. And we're going to test it, and then we're going to get in a conversation about where the ends of these wires connect to, and where's the positive and negative, and where's the magnetic positive and negative. You follow me? So we're dealing with magnetism and we're dealing with electric here. So now we're going to talk about a 90-degree positioning of where the wheel has a magnetic pole as the top and the bottom of the wheel a magnetic pole. Then 90 degrees off will be the rings, which are going to be the positive and negative. And let's go ahead and test this guy right now. So obviously this one here is a positive. This side's a negative. That's a positive over here. All right, negative, positive, negative. So we're going to fire this up. That'll fire up this coil and this coil. And we'll start off by putting a keeper bar across these two, okay? So let's grab the other end of the jumper cable, and we're going to touch. All right, so it took that out of my hand. And let's check this, make sure it reads south. This should read north. So I'm touching the wire, you can see the spark, and it's staying in its polarity that it's supposed to. Now we'll go ahead and just keeper bar here. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. Let's go ahead and go back to the rings. Now, this ring here is sitting on top of 1/4-inch rubber. So it's insulated from the top of the magnet. So that's going to be the positive. What's going on? Dave in the house. Hello, Dave. We're talking about where the charges of electrical charges are going to contain themselves inside the wheel, and there's going to be, these are all in series, and 16 gauge wire, 36 turns per. Each one is in different directions, so when you put energy into the wire, that the same pole as the magnet itself projects a stronger version of itself. and we will be flopping the poles, so whatever's a positive will become a negative, and back and forth. And we'll talk about that, why we're doing that. And there's going to be two ends to all this wire. One end will go to the ring. What's up, Tommy? Tommy? Yep, the automatic flip-flop. This nice little magnetic switching device that's going to be keyed off of this wheel. So this wheel will know when to switch itself and which is positive and negative, which is fascinating. So back to this over here. So one of these wires will be connected to the positive ring, and the other ring will be a negative, and that'll be through the body and the ground and the chassis below it. So right now, if I may have a short right now, but if I touch the, say I make the chassis, that's the chassis, which will be the same as the core. So when I touch the core, you're gonna see there's obviously a closed circuit there, right? So now if I take this ring that I had made and I still make the core negative, then I touch the ring, I have a dead short. So I have to get back in there and get that disconnected. Yeah, these are little PMHs, guys. So to you guys read Tommy's comment, basically these are little PMHs. So you have the whole thing, the whole wheel itself, with the motor block underneath it, all that iron, and the handle up top, and that center core, this core assembly, and that with the handle becomes grounded. And you ground it as a bond, as a bonding ground. So there'll be several grounds going on here from different parts of the circuitry. But for because you can see that the pipe that's back here is obviously in ground. Not to mention I got a 8-foot grounding rod underneath that pipe, and that pipe is in the ground 4 feet. So that's not 4 feet. It's 8 feet pipe. And underneath that, I got a grounding rod that I drew down. So that's some good ground. Then you got the barge across the top, and the hook that's going to be coming down the top will be where the positive side of the rail here is. I may have to flip it. I may have to put the positive on the chassis, but I don't know how that's going to go with the ground. I'm going to have to do a little more research which one of these are going to be positive, because I believe that the handle would be the thing that keeps the positive going, and then the negative would be this bottom rail, which would be what is being fed. I don't know. I'm gonna have to get there. I'm not there yet, but how the fed is. But you'll have one wire going to one ring, isolate it from everything, and then this with the bolts coming down is part of the motor chassis as long as the core. Now on the core here, we're going to create a north pole, which the north pole up top here, which would be putting out south pole magnets, and then the bottom of the chassis would be the south pole, and that would be putting out a negative charge, and that would be going to ground. So you have what we're doing is we're making a dipole. Hey Paul, how you doing? Glad you're part of the conversation. A good reactance. Well, I like that you brought that up, Paul, because this pipe here, if you look in Ed's picture, he has this he has two rings. There's this ring, and the one you don't see is in the back, and it's connected to this flange. So there's two rings. So there's two things going on up top there. And if you look in this picture, let me get to the picture, because a reactance, we're going to get into this reactance, because that pipe is going to be a reactable reactor. It's going to be a saturable reactor, is what we're going to talk about. Because in Ed's writings here, he talks about encasing a coil, and to do better yet, he says you have a coil with a core, and then you encase it, and you only connect one end and make a ring on the end. He's talking about that pipe as well, because I believe in magnetic current. He's talking about the whole wheel, and you can see the pipe is part of the grounding system. So if you're going to pull energy out of the ground, it can't be like you put electric to it. Doesn't work. The ground just absorbs it. But what the ground does pay attention to is a high voltage static. And that's, how do we know why that's the energy that we're going to react to the ground with? Because the clouds, Mother Nature shows us that when a cloud storm comes in and goes over the ground and it's charged, whatever the bottom of that cloud is charged, the ground below it, the opposite charge comes to the surface of the ground, and the same charge of the bottom of that cloud goes down in the ground. It gets subdued. We'll call that in electromagnetic, you call that shielding. So it's shielding that charge, so it's going down. We could go in later conversations on what's good about that the ground is separating its own charge, instead of it, when you don't have a cloud above and nothing reacting to the ground is just basically a negative, ready to suck the chrome off a trailer hitch. It'll absorb everything, but all of a sudden it reacts to high voltage static. So remember one thing, guys. Ed had all the parts, especially the electronics of Model T Fords. They were great pieces to have. You could talk about the buzz box itself, the coils itself. If you look at the whole distributor and everything that's there, is making some good ass stuff. You can get some high voltage, and you can multiply the voltage, and you can get high voltage, and then you start multiplying it, and then the next thing you know, it talks about concentrating, separating, and multiplying. And these are the things that this wheel, what's up, Dave, that this wheel is very much capable of doing. And right now, to tell you the truth, this wheel is being used right now to see what Ed did based on his magnetic currents. We don't know what the wheel did. We're not talking about anything crazy right now. We are trying to basically take a weak magnet on a wheel, that a picture that I have that's been stripped down. Ed's wheel, when he passed away, the wheel was stripped down, but I believe by nobody but Ed. Ed, in this picture, is the only picture of him with his wheel. He's got all this stuff. He's telling a story here, okay? Telling a story. And I believe Ed stripped the wheel. He knew he was sick. He put everything away. He had places where he kept it. The thing is this. A while back, I think in '34, the Sheriff's Department got a visit from Army Corps engineers. And I believe either the Army Corps engineers, it had to be Army Corps engineers. His name was Colonel, let me get the book. I got the book. I believe it's in this book right here. Rusty McClure. okay, I believe was the gentleman who was the gentleman that came to visit the sheriff. He was the head of the Army Corps Engineer. He was a general or something like that. Or he was part of the Navy. Well, why he went there was to see the sheriff was because there was a lot of crazy signals coming out of the location of Edward Leedskalnin. So he had to go talk to the sheriff. Sheriff talked to him and said, well, Mr. Ed's a strange person, but he means no harm. He's a good faith person in the church. He does well to the community, and he has a tourist attraction down there. He likes to play with radio. Well, so they both went and paid Ed a visit, and the general had to see this for himself. And here you go. He gets there. He's blown away, fascinated. At this time, before that, at Ed's, I believe it at his first location, I have to look back on the affidavit of when he made the patent, but when he made the patent, he had all this set up in the ground and everything, and the patent office wanted him to send it to the patent office. He's like, no way. He refused. He said, send the gentleman out here, I'll show them. They came out, looked at the wheel, whatever he showed them, they wanted to take the wheel. And he said, no, you can. I just want to file a patent. And nobody knows what that patent was for, except for Ed specifically specifies in Magnetic Current book that my best wheel, do not make this. I made 10 machines, and I have made a patent on my best machine. And this is his best machine. But the picture of his best machine's been stripped down. And that picture is when Ed was really old. And pretty much, he had already done what he was doing and did. So, obviously, he stripped down everything, took the picture. He stripped everything off the wheel. And the colonel was there, was impressed. Back to the story. So, the agents from the patent office went out there, 2 of them, at his first location. Okay? It is at his first location. And what happened was he wouldn't give him the wheel. So he refused. A few days later, some thugs came in, beat him almost to death. And at that point, he was already eyeing up commercial property off of 1 because it was the main thoroughfare. And he was already accumulated some cool stuff that he made. And he wanted to continue on being a place where people would come visit and pay a fee. So at this point, all beaten up, fresh out of the hospital. Well, this is from a lot of study, Tommy. Tommy, I got good years in it, and there's about 2,000 affidavits. And let me pull up the other book real quick. I don't want to get off topic, but there's another book that I have. It's called Mr. Can. Mr. Can is Dead. And there's affidavits in this book on what Ed did and how he did things. So we're not really going there, but nothing mentions the wheel other than we know he went for a patent. He got his ass beat almost to death. He moved the location. He knew the realtor sold him the first property because that's the one he moved in with. He found them at another location. He already had that in the works. He decided to pull the trigger, get moving over there, get rocking. And when he started doing that, he got built up, got that place going and moved over there. And what happened was at that point is when the colonel came to visit at his second location. But that other stuff happened before. But he was saying that radio signals were coming out because Key West, another 150 miles away maybe, or 100 miles away, was the Navy station down there. So their ships were picking up stuff. So they went there, paid him a visit. The sheriff vouched for him. And, you know, it was pre-Nazi wartime. So the army was up in arms anyway. So that's the moral of that story. But the funny thing is when Ed passed away, that same colonel came back and guarded the place And I think at that point, he stripped the place. At that point. And the reason was he was there. He was there to protect the place. Meanwhile, he took all the important stuff. You know what he didn't take? Is basic, stupid electronic stuff. The stuff we see on the wall. But if you're really digging deep, the stuff you see on the wall, every little thing tells a story. Every little story. How it lines up with what. And everything is in relations to the wheel. So, with that all being said, back to you in the beginning when I read your comment about a reactor, a reactance, a reactor, this pipe here. What is a saturable reactor? Well, saturable reactor is when you take a pulse, a AC wave, and you have it into a DC constant. So if we put a low voltage, say 6 volts of DC through this coil, that would be something similar to this guy that Ed has on his wall. And this would go down the pipe, but it'll be way better than this. Trust me. This is just a mock-up I made 5 years ago when I was thinking about and looking at what was at Ed's Coral Castle hanging on the wall. And I'm going to have to go clip some of my old videos, make pictures, do a video, and show snapshots of me measuring how far down this pipe goes, what's the diameter, what's the flange diameter, the other flange diameter, the height from this to the top of that, how far it goes out, what's the distance from this to the top of the handle. Also, the bottom. Well, that's what I'm getting at of. The saturable reactor, remember, there's an iron core, there's wire around the core, and then you got it encased in a capsule that's going deep ground. So we want to produce a high static inside here. And you look on top of Ed's, let's go back to his picture. If you look on Ed's picture of him holding the wheel, there is, let's see, there is these things that are in the back. And you only see the one in the front, but there's another one behind it. So these, I believe, are bottles with wire wrapped around them with little contacts. And when I go to make that video of the clips, there's the bottles that I took pictures on his wall are still hanging. The bottom of the bottles are broken out so you can get through them. And then the wire comes, the top of the bottle wire comes down through the middle of the bottle, and then there's a contact. And then the wire comes out and goes to another bottle, and then there's a four-banger contact, a double contact and a double contact. So that to me was the two bottles that were sitting on top of there. So that's where you get into the saturable reactor, because if you look at AC, AC's current is controlled by a very small DC voltage. Okay, so what by using that pipe that's in the ground, and we start using the pipe, and we flood the pipe with one charge, but a very high charge, a static charge. The interior of this pipe would be picking up the opposite energy. So whatever energy we want to come from the ground through that pipe, remember, the ground has both. Usually showing negative when no storms are involved. Only when high static pressure is in place does the ground show the opposite charge of the bottom of that cloud. So we're dealing with how the ground reacts to what. What does it react to? Exactly what I'm saying, is that it's going to be a high static volts. And, you know, basically I got some cool stuff coming. Let me show you this one thing I made for some sample, test in the pipe. And the easy way to make high voltage, I don't have the Model T parts, but guess what? I sure know how to make my own flyback. And the voltage that comes out of this can go into this and produce. And this is probably what might be inside the bottle. I mean, for Pete's sake, we have no idea what these two things are right there. There's one and one behind it. We know the hook comes down and it's touching that. So what he says is electricity and magnetism is the same. So basically what you have is a large magnetic strength, and what you need on a 90-degree angle off of it is a good conductor, and you're going to go ahead and make your electricity. And that's why right here on that pickup he has right here, look at that metal pipe. It's not a pipe. It's a it's one of his wedges that he had, that it's like 2 inches wide, 1/4 inch thick, and about 1/4 inch and about 2 inches that way, and it goes all the way out. And the magnet underneath that, so it magnetizes both ends oppositely. And then he has the baling wire coming down, and he's going into yeah, it could be a leaf spring. That's probably where he got those originally. You're right, Tommy. And then he has these valves stuck in the bottom here. I got to show another, in that video, I'll be showing the bottom side of this piece of wood, and it's gouged out like a pipe sits in there. And what he has is a valve stuck in a hole that's drilled, a valve stuck in a hole, and the baling wire tying down. So one side is positive and one side's negative. If you look at that bar, one side's dark and one side's got a whitish tint to it, and that would see the difference in the poles right there. So you guys can see real good right there. Look, you got made it back. You guys still there? Holy cannoli. I can't believe that. I lost everybody. Who's there now? Who do I got left? Holy shit. I can't believe that. I was so excited, my battery went dead on my phone. It took forever to get enough charge on it. Welcome back. Let's let a few people get back on board and we'll get back to the Saturable Reactor. Hey, Tommy. I know, man, I wasn't paying attention to how much charge I had on my phone. My bad. That was stressful as hell. So, Saturable Reactor. What's making the Saturable Reactor react? Well, let's think about this. The outside casing's iron. When the wheel goes by it, there's a keeper bar that comes off that wheel that I believe that was taken off the old one. And it's the reaction between the keeper bar. I'm going to show you something. I mean, you guys can see this, right? See, if this was the keeper bar, the same thing is what the magnets are, width and length. The keeper bar, actually I could just use this. Got a good cow magnet. All right, it's ballpark. There's the cow magnet. So, every time a pole passes that keeper bar, and obviously I'm going to move this closer. Mine's a little further away than Ed's is, so I'm going to move it a little closer. But it'll make the iron react. So what we have going here that's pretty awesome about Ed talking about a magnetic current. Let me get you guys off of that. In magnetic current, he mentions about if you want to make it a coil stronger with a core, he says put it in iron casing. The best part about that is the top, is that outside flange is going to be one charge, while the bottle that sits on top of it is connected to the top of the bottle with the core coming up from the center, and that's going to be the opposite charge. So we're going to have both charges appearing, the top of the flange of the reactor and the top of the core of that center coil with the with the glass bottle on top. And every time this wheel turns past that keeper bar, the saturable reactor that's going into the ground is going to be causing the energy in the ground, the one pole that this pipe presents, whatever I put down bottom, if I put a negative, positive is going to be showing its face. The negative is going to repel and go down deeper. Like rings in a tree, Tommy says. That's right. We're adding layers, guys. This is about layers and layers. So the reaction between the wheel, the fact that we're pulsing the wheel, that's regular magnets. Now we're able to pulse these to flip their poles. Well, Tommy, that's what I was saying with different layers. One thing Ed has, even though if you get into Ed's works, where's magic, something special. But as you dig deeper, you can see when he learned about this stuff, I think was 20 years after these were made. I can kind of get a reference point about when he moved is just after he filed for the patent. So he kind of gives us a place and time for Ed. But yeah, so the interesting thing is that these poles are flipping. The saturable reactor is reacting. You're having two poles show up at the top end. All the energy's being concealed. You got the main thing, I believe, that if you get into Ed Leedskalnin, why did he put steps going down to a wheel? And why did he also put a bucket with a tree trunk and an arm on the tree trunk for a handle and have a bucket? You would have one or the other. Most likely. So Ed had a good short story for you guys. Is when Ed was dropped off at his new location from the realtor guy who sold him the property, okay? He dropped them off in the morning around 7-ish, and he picked them up around 5:30 or 6:30. And Ed, in that one day, dug in. Remember now, the quarry, coral rock is at the ground surface, basically 4 inches of soil, then that stuff, and that property was sticking out of the ground. But what I'm getting at is he dug 2 feet wide, 8 feet long, 8 feet deep trench. He also put a ladder across the top, put all his tools in there, picks, everything he has for tools, and he had a chain with an anchor into the coral with an eye hook with a chain coming out with a lock. When the guy showed up that day, he had that done already. To me, what would that spot represent to me? 2 things. On the side of Ed's living quarters is where this quarry is, right on the side of where his living quarters is. So that's where he dug down and he started the process of getting in front of the damn coral so he can go into the coral. And that's where that quarry started. And he started that quarry from his basement. So listen, in Ed's lower tool shed area is ground level. One thing I did at Coral Castle in many of my trips, the best one was when a friend of mine says, I bet he has a basement. And I said, oh, there's no way to it, but the steps do go down into the well. What if there was an entrance that went around to the basement? And what if he had it flooded out? Well, it was just kind of something I just made up and kind of thought of. And I said, well, it's something to look into. Well, I'm not really following that theory with the steps and a subterranean tunnel. But what I am getting at is this. The Saturable Reactor in Ed's location underneath his house, I believe is Ed. It's reported the first time Ed went to the property, when he was shown the property, he brought a dowsing stick and he doused it and he marked an area. Okay? And I believe that's where he dug. And what he did was he dug for the well, and he also figured out the direction of the water channel underneath, and that's where he put his living quarters and his well. They're all in parallel to where there's a water chamber underneath. Now, the way to get a high static to react, you have to have moisture in the air. I didn't mention the part to you guys where you need water. So water in the ground is subterranean that has a Saturable reactor connected to it with a high voltage changes the whole ballpark, guys. Yes, Tommy, a river runs through it. Just like the Nile ran through the pyramid. Not getting into the pyramid, I'm just saying there's a water reservoir channel that runs under where that's Saturable reactor. And how I can prove to you is I got a video that's one of my Ed's tools. I'm going to dig it up. I'm going to make some snapshot pictures of it. And I show that I'm pouring a 24-ounce Slurpee of water in the bottom of Ed's, his wheel. At the bottom of the motor block, there's a gear. Well, I was curious if there was a basement down there, so I poured water around that gear, and the water stayed, and I was highly disappointed. And I poured the whole cup there, and the water stayed. And I said, well, let me go get one more cup. I went to the bathroom, came back with my cup, and the water was gone. So I poured the other cup on it, and the water disappeared right away. So, basement, yes, obviously. Ed said he made 10 machines. Did the Army Corps engineers come and take it all? Yes. Puzzling to me is the fact that he mentions in one of his pamphlets that he put out there is that what if you had positive and negative running around a nucleus, and that nucleus was a sunlight. So sunlight. I don't know what that was. Hey, Tommy. So, sorry about that. I don't know. That's the internet there. So, back to the water. So, the way clouds reproduce water and the high static that the dielectric, I'm going to call that cloud. It's polarized dielectric, and that's what we're going to create in this ground. This Saturable reactor is going to be a high dielectric. Another helicopter flying above my house, by the way. They do all the time. I just must be in the helicopter pathway from the airport. Anyway, so the clouds, the reaction to the ground pushing its poles of its material, of its elements down, repelling the bottom of the cloud's energy, forcing down. And we're going to create that in that Saturable reactor. It's going to be controlled through our wheel. And we're not even getting into right now about the coils that go around the wheel. But from what Ed says about taking right here, he says, let me get back to this one little section and we'll bounce off this. I think it's time for me to roll. Now that you make magnetic currents in 3 different ways, but in principle, they all were made exactly the same way. Magnetic currents are made by concentrating, then dividing, and then shifting the existing north and south pole individual magnets from one place to another. Now I will illustrate how my best machine is doing it. I will use only one coil and one U-shaped permanent magnet without the winding that my machine, those windings, without using the winding that the machine uses to increase the permanent magnetic strength. I believe he came up with a way to, he talks about everything we're talking about right now. None of this is my doing, magnetic current. It's just a reaction, how Mother Nature is reacting. So I believe Ed figured out a way to be able to take a north pole on the top, south pole on the bottom. You got a vertical dipole. And then he has this horizontal dipole situation going that's feeding electricity off a strong magnetic pole that I'll have to get into that with you another time, but that center shaft, if you put a coil in there and you feed that coil the same direction that you want the top to be south, north, and the bottom to be south, I can make that. And obviously Ed did too. He just pulled out all the wire in that picture. I know he did, because it's written that when he was sick, he knew he was sick. He knew what was going on. So stay tuned. We'll continue hooking all these up, and then we'll separate these two again and get them to where they're bipole or dipole, in a sense, to where they're two different poles. And then we'll get into what the coil on the inside, not only is it making a north and south presence on the, this is going to be going on a, on this guy over here, V6. So we're going to put it on that, and that's a lot of iron there. And it'll have the core top here being North Pole, way down bottom 2 feet is going to be South Pole, and that chassis is going to be that motor block is going to be connected to the ground. And we're going to do this. See this in my fingers? That's going to be to the iron pipe, to where the pipe is the keeper bar. The bottom of the motor block is spark gapped to the bottom of that core there. And the top of the handle coming across comes down the bar. And the pipe itself, I believe, becomes the spark gap between the motor block, and it's being changed directionally from the wheel. So everything is in series, which is from the outer core to the inner core, the reference to the wheel with the handle, and reference to the bottom of the motor block having a tight spark gap to the bottom of this pipe. All right, you guys, leave your comments. Hopefully you enjoyed. Moving on, we'll get into what happens to the coil inside this core, what magnetic field it radiates out horizontally. This core will be wrapped vertically to drive. Everything has a placement and a layer. So this gear ring here sits on top of every magnet. So basically, not only is each magnet at each end touching, but there is a gear ring that's touching nothing other than the top of the magnet. And then there's concrete in between here, which I have these wires that are just, what is it? 4 wires go that way, and they come around a loop back to the same spot. Don't know why I did them. I just did them. If I ever need them, I'll use them. But they're in the gap between this ring and that bottom ring. This ring isolated. This ring is isolated. This ring is also part of the connection to this and the motor block. Handle coming up is also part of this and the motor block. You have a coil in here that has two ends. That coil that's going to be in this core here, which is going to be driving this to be a north pole, a strong north pole, and the bottom of the block to be a strong south pole. And the two connections here is one end of this, the bottom end of this coil is connected to the chassis, which makes it a negative, which will be chasing the positive, which that's why you see a keeper bar. There's a little hook coming off of here because that coil is connected to this hook, which comes off and spark gaps over, I believe, back to the center of one of these magnets. So there's some type of spark gap going on there. We'll get into that down the road, and we'll look into the pictures I have and some of his stuff and writings, and we'll see why would there be another gap there. Is it a dual gap to where there's a buildup? Because Ed is talking about, if you're going to have a spark gap, Ed is talking about right here about concentrating, then dividing, and shifting the existing north and south pole individual magnets. And Tommy, there is 4 spheres around the top, and what they are is bolts facing backwards with the facing up. So without taking Ed's wheel apart, not knowing if anything is really going on, I don't know. I could take electrical charge and put it towards the magnet. It doesn't do nothing to the magnet unless you have it in copper wire. So when Ed's talking about Ed's talking about concentrating then dividing, well, wire divides the positive and negative, so both can run through the wire, and then they make a magnetic field. So here's your wire, and then you have positive and negative, and they're connecting, and they're running together against each other and making a magnetic field. And if you had the wire turned, it would obviously make that the two poles, either way you turned it, would make the poles on either way, regardless if you just had straight wire, then your two poles are what you're feeding. But if you were to turn the wire the opposite way, then you would be switching the poles of where it's coming out of. If you put a compass over to it, the poles would be coming the opposite way. Interesting stuff there. All right, you guys, wire very important for dividing. Trading would be capacitors. You know, Tommy does have that generator, and I'll show the pictures of that in little video clips of that generator. It's made in Rochester. Obviously, got it off a Model T, probably in the, I got to see when that was made, and that'll give reference point to the wheel. There's some more evidence of when he was, because we have a print here that in his advertisement shows when he published Magnetic Current, which was 1945. This is Magnetic Current. And in 1945, he published it. Remember, when he moved to the new location, took him a long time to build it. And 1945, I believe he died in 1951. So at 6 years before he died, he published this. Look how old he is there. He looks every bit of 51 there. So let's just say he stripped this before he got pissed off at the federal government for for trying to take a shit. He stripped it, took a picture to show everybody the bare makings of what nobody knows what he did. Peace out, my brohams. Hopefully you appreciate the work, the time in, because I love it. This is the best doghouse that my wife could ever put me in. Peace out.